Good afternoon, and thank you for your attendance. We're here today to talk about how lawsuits from corporations are attempting to diminish or even stop civil society activism. These type of cases are on the rise across the world, and today we have representatives from Greenpeace organisations who can outline recent and ongoing court cases from the United States, Greenpeace International and Greenpeace in the US, and energy transfer. The United Kingdom, Shell versus Greenpeace UK, and the Netherlands, Milieu Defensie Shell case, and the actions that they are taking for climate justice. Our speakers today are Jasper Inventor, Head of COP29 Greenpeace International Delegation, Yeb Sanyo, Executive Director Greenpeace Southeast Asia, Martin de Suel, Campaigner Greenpeace Netherlands, and Rebecca Newsom, a Senior Political Expert at Greenpeace UK. I'd now like to hand over the microphone to Jasper.
Good afternoon. My name is Jasper Inventor, and I am the Head of Delegation for Greenpeace International here at COP29. I want to begin by acknowledging a growing troubling trend. Civil society is increasingly under attack from lawsuits brought by powerful interests, including fossil fuel companies, aimed at silencing us. These lawsuits are designed to prevent us from speaking out against the harm fossil fuels cause to our communities and climate. Today, I want to address a particularly egregious tactic known as SLAP suits, strategic lawsuit against public participation. SLAP suits are used by unscrupulous business actors to intimidate, silence, and bankrupt those who raise legitimate concerns about their harmful practices. Simply put, SLAPs are an abuse of the legal system by powerful interests seeking to shut down dissent and avoid accountability. Greenpeace International has faced many legal challenges in the past, and history shows the most effective way to combat these threats is by calling out the injustices and standing together with allies. However, since 2016, Greenpeace International and Greenpeace organizations in the US have been entangled in two massive lawsuits designed to silence our advocacy and directly attack our rights to free speech and assembly. These types of lawsuits are a SLAP brought by Energy Transfer, a US-based fossil fuel company that is responsible for the Dakota Access Pipeline, against Greenpeace organizations in the US and Greenpeace International. However, despite having no role in the protests against Energy Transfer's Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock in the US, Greenpeace International, a Dutch-based nonprofit organization, is facing this bullying lawsuit. It is an outrageous attack on Greenpeace International. Energy Transfer is seeking $300 million plus punitive damages and attorney's fees. Energy Transfer's lawsuit accuses Greenpeace organizations of things they did not do and attempts to penalize ordinary public advocacy, particularly free speech and peaceful protest. The Energy Transfer case is the impetus behind this press conference today. Energy Transfer is attempting to hold Greenpeace International, again, a non-profit foundation based in the Netherlands, liable even though Greenpeace International was not on the ground at the protests at Standing Rock. The only involvement Greenpeace International had was signing a letter, along with 500 others, and engaging in a public debate about a matter of global concern. If Energy Transfer is able to hold Greenpeace International liable based on a sign-on letter, then this will have a chilling effect on the activities of civil society everywhere. We are gathered here at COP29 because the science is crystal clear. The climate crisis demands urgent action. We have all converged here in Baku, Azerbaijan, because of the scientific urgency and human rights imperative for climate action. Now more than ever, we need to protect our right to speak. Our right to speak the truth to power and demand better from our leaders. Protest and speech are two of the best tools we have to fight for a livable planet. And while SLAPs, like Energy Transfer's lawsuits, are intended to intimidate Greenpeace organizations and others into silence and drain us of resources, it has had the opposite effect. When the movement fights back, it wins. We are stronger together. SLAP suits like the Energy Transfer case also create opportunities for movements. For example, SLAPs have driven a large, diverse coalition to successfully advocate for the adoption of the European Union Anti-SLAP Directive. The directive, which has now been adopted, aims to provide safeguards to journalists, human rights defenders, and other persons engaged in public participation against SLAPs. But let's be clear. The momentum for genuine climate action is threatened by widespread greenwashing and the promotion of false solutions by powerful corporate interests. These actors often seek to maintain the status quo or introduce inadequate measures under the guise of sustainability, diverting attention from the need for transformative change. Members of the fossil fuel industry have been engaged in decades-long campaign to deceive the public, consumers, and investors about the effects of their coal, oil, and gas products on climate change and undermine climate science and action. And now, we are seeing fossil fuel companies using SLAP suits to silence those calling for urgent climate action. So what does solidarity look like for climate activists facing SLAP suits? From my perspective, it looks like us coming together, calling out corporate bullying. It means when one civil society member faces a SLAP suit, we stand together. And on that note, I want to express my gratitude to all of civil society who have expressed solidarity with Greenpeace International and the US-based Greenpeace. We will continue to fight for our rights in the coming weeks as we move closer to trial on February 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jasper. Before handing over to Jeb, I'd like to mention that we have 2 QR codes, one for civil society allies here in Baku to join a sign-on letter expressing solidarity with Greenpeace against Energy Transfer's meritless US $300 million lawsuit. We have also a printout of the QR code here in the audience or on mobile phones. We would encourage you to formally express your support. I'd now like to hand over to Jeb Sano for his intervention.
Thank you very much, and pleasant afternoon to everybody. As we talk about SLAP suits, as my colleague has just presented to you, I want to share with you 2 cases, the first of which is about a case that we lodged against big oil and other fossil fuel companies. My name is Jeb Sanyo, and I'm a climate activist from the Philippines. I also serve as the Executive Director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia. The climate justice and liability work of Greenpeace encompasses a range of creative legal actions across the world, but one that is most notable in our hearts is the case that we filed at the Philippines Commission on Human Rights. Rendered vulnerable because of climate impacts, my country, the Philippines, has been really bearing the brunt of the most adverse impacts of the climate crisis. And many destructive typhoons, including the series of 5 destructive storms in the last 3 weeks. And when we talk about the crisis, when we talk about the climate emergency, it is heartbreaking, but what is more heartbreaking and profoundly unfair is that the people who suffered the most, or the countries who suffered the most, are those who contributed the least to the root of the problem. So with this heartbreak, we brought it to the doorstep together with survivors of typhoons and communities in the Philippines. We brought this heartbreak to the doorstep of the Philippines Commission on Human Rights, and believing that climate change interferes with the enjoyment of our fundamental rights, we demanded accountability for those who were actually causing the crisis. It was an amazing journey because it was a landmark case. No one had tried that before. And so as petitioners, we planted ourselves at the gate of hopes And we asserted that under both domestic and international law, both governments and private enterprises have an obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. So it's that nexus between human rights and climate. We asserted that the biggest polluters, in this case, 47 investor-owned fossil fuel companies, mostly oil and gas companies, should be held accountable for violations or threats of violations of Filipinos' basic human rights. And we prayed that the Commission on Human Rights declare them accountable for impairing, infringing, abusing, or violating our rights. This case concluded in May of 2022, 7 years after we lodged the case. What did the Commission find? They ruled that climate change is an issue of human rights, and there is an obligation of states to address it under international law. Second, on the role of carbon majors, the term we used for those big polluters, oil and gas companies, their role in climate change, the Commission found that they are held morally and legally liable. The Commission also concluded that oil companies, in particular, willful obfuscation of climate science and their acts to delay, derail, and obstruct the energy transition is immoral. Imagine human rights institutions saying these companies have committed immoral acts, and this corporation deceived the whole world and robbed us of an entire generation of an opportunity to actually prevent the escalation of the climate crisis. So this was a historic moment and a landmark victory for climate justice. It marked for us the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel industry's stranglehold over our political systems. And for the first time ever, big polluting companies have been found responsible for human rights harms resulting from the climate crisis. Now let me talk about another case, one that has been lodged by big polluter Shell against Greenpeace in 2023. And if you look at the screen, you will see images of artifacts from typhoons from my country. And one reason why I am involved in this case of Shell versus Greenpeace is because I joined a protest. And let me share with you that story. As the winter sun rose over the North Atlantic in a chilly day in January of 2023, just off the coast of the northeastern tip of Africa, a small group of activists aboard the Greenpeace vessel, the Arctic Sunrise, readied themselves in a daring move to occupy a gigantic equipment, a piece of equipment, an oil and gas platform owned by Shell that was being transported by a larger vessel and whose ultimate destination was the North Sea to pump for more climate-wrecking oil and gas. These activists climbed and occupied Shell's floating production, storage, and offloading, or FPSO, unit for 13 days. And then during that time, Shell was announcing its record-breaking annual profits of nearly $40 billion. We were calling on Shell to stop drilling for new oil and gas and instead take the responsibility for causing climate breakdown and start paying into the Climate Loss and Damage Fund. We wanted them to stop drilling and start paying. The platform is the first new operated vessel for Shell in the North Sea for 30 years, and it can yield the equivalent of 45,000 barrels of oil per day. Shell filed a lawsuit against us, and my colleague later on will describe to you more about that case. It filed a case specifically against Greenpeace UK and Greenpeace International, including the individual activists over this peaceful protest. The claim is one of the biggest legal threats against Greenpeace's ability to campaign in our more than 50-year history. And make no mistake about it, these aggressive legal tactics are a bid to silence the growing dissent over Shell's moves to double down on fossil fuel investment and abandon any of their pretenses to transition to renewables. Again, as I said, I was part of that group of activists, and I'm among the 8 activists individually named in Shell's legal claim. I joined that protest because Filipinos, including my own loved ones, have lived through the devastation caused by Shell and companies like them. And 10 years ago, as a climate negotiator at COP19, I spoke while my brother was still missing in the fallout of the super typhoon, and incredibly, he survived. And these artifacts you see in front of you are from the very city where his life was spared. But as he survived, he helped carry the dead bodies of 78 innocent people who tragically did not. Shell is trying to silence my legitimate demands. That must stop its senseless and greedy pursuit of fossil fuels and take accountability for the destruction it is wreaking upon the world. I will stand up in court and fight this together with Greenpeace. And if Shell refuses to stop drilling, I will refuse to stop fighting for climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheb. Always a powerful voice in these negotiation rooms. And as you can see on the screen, we do have those artefacts, and we have them here with us in Baku. And we also have some items, some symbolic, personal treasures from people around the world, which we'll be also unveiling and bringing into the negotiation rooms next week. So please keep an eye out for those details. I'd now like to hand over to Martin for news from the Netherlands.
Back in 2018, Milieudefensie, the Friends of the Earth from the Netherlands, launched the climate case against Shell. And this would turn out to be a historic case. And I'm very proud to say that a year later, in 2019, Greenpeace Netherlands joined the case as a co-plaintiff. Because as you just have heard, Shell and other oil companies are trying to silence us. But when we join forces, when we act together, we can be stronger. And we must be stronger, because when we take it up against these powerful oil companies, we must be strong. And this case was the first time that we took an oil major like Shell to court to demand that Shell reduces its future CO2 emissions globally. Because Shell has known for decades that burning their oil puts lives of people at risk, as we see today with the devastating floods in Spain and typhoons threatening people in the Philippines. So as we are facing the escalating climate crisis, the court in The Hague gave us hope in 2021 when it ruled that Shell must reduce its global CO2 emissions by 45% in 2030. Last Tuesday, the court did not impose such an emission cap, but it was very clear. Shell has a human rights obligation to reduce its CO2 emissions to avert the biggest risks of the climate crisis. I quote from the court's verdict: "There can be no doubt that protection from dangerous climate change is a human right. It is recognized worldwide that states have an obligation to protect their citizens from the adverse effects of dangerous climate change." End of quote. This really strengthens the foundations that people around the world use to hold their governments accountable. Like in the Netherlands, where people from the Dutch Caribbean island of Bonaire and Greenpeace take their government to court, demanding zero emissions in 2040. But the court continued beyond the obligation of states and concluded that companies like Shell are obliged to reduce their emissions too. A quote from the court: "To combat the danger posed by climate change, everyone has a responsibility. To fulfill that responsibility, the focus does not lie exclusively on states, especially companies whose products have contributed to the creation of the climate problem and have it in their power to contribute to combating it are obliged to do so via other inhabitants of the earth." End of quote. Of course, we had hoped for more. We have won a fight, now we lost a fight, but in the end we are winning the battle. Shell's win will be short. That's what legal experts are now saying about this verdict. Because the court gave a very clear warning. Shell's investments in new oil and gas are at odds with the Paris Agreement and with Shell's human rights obligation. Because since 2018, the broad consensus on what human rights obligations has become stronger. There's the latest IPCC report, but also the International Energy Agency says there's no room for new oil and gas in a world that stays below 1.5 degrees of heating. And it calculates that fossil fuel production must decline by 55% by 2035 to align with 1.5. There's the new EU due diligence legislation, which requires polluters like Shell to make a climate plan and reduce their emissions in line with staying below 1.5 degrees. And of course, from last year's COP outcome, when countries after nearly 30 years of talking agreed to step away from fossil fuels, in line with the science, in line with 1.5 degrees. And these laws and agreements that are also being written here today in Baku are not just binding. They can be enforced when we step to the courts. Indeed, the Court of The Hague gave citizens around the world a roadmap to take big oil to court to stop new fossil fuel projects and hold the profiteers that caused the climate crisis accountable. But I really hope that this won't be needed. I hope that the countries talking here today in Baku take action here and agree to come with concrete plans and policies to phase out fossil fuels and say no to new oil and gas drillings.
Yep, thank you, Martin. I'll hand over to Rebecca now from...
Hi everyone, my name's Rebecca Newsom. I'm Senior Political Advisor at Greenpeace UK. I'm going to talk about a legal case connecting to what my colleague Jeb just talked about. In 2023, Greenpeace peacefully occupied a Shell oil platform as it was travelling to the North Sea to unlock new oil wells in the middle of a climate emergency. Over the course of the 13-day occupation, protesters called on the oil giant to stop drilling for new fossil fuels and to start paying up for the damages caused around the world as a result of burning those fossil fuels. This included Jeb as part of the protest, who, as he mentioned, his brother carried 78 dead bodies to mass graves in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan. Shell is now suing Greenpeace UK and Greenpeace International for millions of dollars because of this peaceful climate protest. Shell is claiming around $1 million in damages, an injunction, and legal fees that could spiral into many more millions. Shell's public justification for this lawsuit appears to be safety concerns, but this is clearly absolute rubbish for several reasons. Firstly, Shell and/or its contractors materially increased the risks of the action, for example, by engaging in dangerous weaving in an attempt to throw off the activists. Secondly, this case simply cannot just be about seeking compensation for losses, because just bringing this case forward in the English commercial courts is going to cost Shell many millions more than the millions of dollars that they're claiming in damages. It's going to cost Greenpeace as well over £1 million and Shell many millions more. So this shows that there is an essential evil lying behind Shell's motivation for this case. The motivation is to have a chilling effect on the right to protest, to make Greenpeace and other environmental groups think twice before protesting against oil and gas ever again, and to demonstrate a bullish approach to their investors that they will max out on every last drop in the most aggressive and unrelenting way possible. But this is obviously a response, actually, in fact, to the fact that the walls are closing in around Shell and their real license to operate. The UK government has recently decided to end new oil and gas licenses. As Martin mentioned, there's progressively strong COP outcomes pushing fossil fuels out of the system. We've had another High Court case in the UK, the Finch ruling, that Scope 3 emissions have to be taken into account in environmental impact assessments. Greenpeace UK is currently taking Shell to court for its Jackdaw field in the North Sea. Public opinion is turning against Shell as well. More than 130,000 members of the public have joined people like Benedict Cumberbatch and Greta Thunberg and civil society groups like Amnesty International to condemn Shell's callous and vindictive attack on Greenpeace. And we've had thousands of members of the public chipping in to raise money, more than £1.4 million to help us in this legal case. So it's clear that overall, as Martin also said, this is overall a losing battle for Shell. And governments do need to recognise that Shell and other oil and gas majors have zero genuine intention to either transition to a renewable future or to take responsibility for the climate damages that they've caused around the world. So that leaves it in the hands of governments to step up, do something in this space, to stop drilling and to make them start paying. We've got opportunities in the negotiations right now to cement those outcomes, and we urge all governments to step up and take those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. Some lengthy interventions, but as you can imagine, with these types of cases, it does require some background and explaining. We do have a couple of minutes for questions if there's anything from the floor. If not, our speakers are available afterwards. I was intrigued by a comment that you have made outside the press room here earlier, that we've come here to make polluters pay, and yet in some ways they're trying to make us pay. Surely that's a strange scenario here at Baku. Yep, would you want to, or Jasper, respond to that?
Thank you, Aaron. Certainly, that is the absurdity of it when Shell, who has been responsible for a lion's share of emissions and part of a small number, relatively small number of corporations responsible for the lion's share of emissions that has caused climate chaos. They're supposed to be the ones who are accountable for this whole crisis, and we have been asking them to start paying for the harms that they have caused, and for them to have these claims and make us and insist that we are the ones who should pay them in this case. It's just, profoundly insulting, especially for someone who comes from a country that is ravaged by all of these climate impacts. This is at the height of arrogance of a company that we are holding accountable for climate harms, and yeah, it is not just upsetting, but it is a manifestation of how this company refuses to take that accountability.
Thank you very much. Question? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you all, excuse me, for your inputs. I just have a timely question for especially those countries that are preparing to take the case happening in the International Court of Justice on state obligations to climate change, very similar to what you were speaking about with the Philippines. For those countries that were looking to use the Shell case, despite the latest appeals that went maybe not the best way expected, how can we continue to use those types of cases and make sure that it can also be woven in to increase state obligations to actually go for the most ambitious climate change and keep us 1.5 to stay alive? Thank you.
I think the hearings of the International Court of Justice in December will really mark a turning point in the sort of wave of climate litigation that we're seeing today. So that will be very important. And what I also really hope is that really the stories of people who are impacted by the climate crisis from around the world will also be able to tell those stories at that moment. I'm also working on the case I briefly mentioned against the Dutch state with people from the Dutch Caribbean island of Bonaire, which will be heavily impacted. We're facing the impacts already today. As Greenpeace International submitted statements from people from all over the world to the International Court of Justice. So I really hope that those stories will be an important part of the advisory opinion and in a broader sense for all the climate cases against states, but also companies around the world.
Yes, I shared with you earlier the case we filed in the Philippines on human rights and climate justice. With the conclusion of that investigation, a growing number of cases are now being heard or filed across the world. We filed that case in 2015. There were very few cases, but now there's I would say, a floodgate of cases in litigation that we believe many more communities will take stand against these companies that are putting profit over people and planet. And if I may say, I know we are running out of time. If I may say, while we stand here and look at what's happening around us in these negotiations, we want to remind ourselves that the world leaders gathering before us, the battle will not necessarily be won or lost in these plenary halls. They will be won or lost where people live, where people strive to have a life at the grassroots. And even if we do our best in the pursuit of justice and bring these cases and these culprits to court, the battle will not be won or lost in the chambers of law. It will be won or lost in the chambers of people's hearts. And that's what we're trying to do in Greenpeace.
Okay, thank you very much for all your attendance. That concludes our panel.